My name is Eulalia Marin. Though most people in Savannah just call me Leah, I turned 71 this afternoon, old enough to know better than to expect too much, but not old enough to stop hoping. I've lived in this narrow Victorian row house for 40 years, long enough to memorize the rhythm of the Spanish moss outside the windows, the scent of the river air that seeps in after rain. I'd spent the morning polishing the silver and setting the table for 6 Cassia and Colt, Maureen, my 2 grandchildren, and me. 6 plates, 6 linen napkins, 6 glasses catching the soft light from the bay window. Cassia had promised they'd come by 3. "We'll bring wine," she said, over the phone last week, cheerful and certain, the way she always sounds before forgetting something. By 2:30, the lemon cake had cooled and the icing begun to soften. I lit the candles anyway. The silence in the house swelled like humidity before a storm. I checked my phone, then checked it again. No calls, no texts, just the faint hum of the refrigerator and a song from the street below where tourists laughed and a trolley bell clanged toward Forsyth Park. At 4, Mr. Ashford from next door tapped gently on my doorframe. He held out a card and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Maybe they're running late," he offered. I told him I was sure that was it. He didn't argue. When the sun slipped low, I turned off the oven light, slid a single slice of cake onto my plate, and sat down at the long table meant for 6. The frosting tasted too sweet. The clock ticked, steady and indifferent. Somewhere down the block, a church bell marked 6 o'clock, and I realized I'd set the table for ghosts. I wrapped the rest of the cake in plastic, labeled it neatly Lemon 314, and placed it in the refrigerator beside last week's leftovers. The light from the fridge painted the kitchen a pale blue as I closed the door. My phone buzzed just once. The faint vibration startling in the quiet. I reached for it, heart quickening, and saw the sender's name, Cassia. The next morning, the house still smelled faintly of lemon and candle wax. I woke earlier than usual, though there was nowhere I needed to be. The air felt heavy, the kind that clings to your thoughts. I brewed coffee, then carried my old checkbook ledgers to the table I'd set so carefully the day before. The napkins were folded again, the plates stacked and spotless, as if nothing had happened. The first ledger was from 20 years ago, its corners soft from use. I turned pages filled with neat blue ink, each line a memory I'd rather forget. Cassia's tuition gap, $1.200. Colt's overdue business tax, $9.50. Maureen's cruise deposit, $600. Every entry marked as temporary loan. Temporary had a way of turning permanent in my family. I remembered writing those checks in the same steady hand, convincing myself I was helping them build something solid. I wanted to believe that love meant keeping everyone else from falling. My late husband, Tom, had once warned me, "You buy peace with money, Leah. But peace doesn't stay bought." I'd laughed at the time, calling him cynical. Now his words felt like scripture written in ledgers. I flipped to more recent pages, months of Venmo transfers and wire notes, each labeled just until next week. I tried to count them, but the numbers blurred. My chest tightened in that familiar mix of guilt and foolishness. The sun had climbed higher, pouring thin light through the lace curtains. I picked up my phone and opened our last text thread, the same one that held a string of unanswered messages. Birthday reminders, little hearts, updates about the garden. My fingers hesitated before I typed, "Hope everything's okay." I watched the message linger on the screen, a gray bubble waiting for blue. The phone stayed still. No dots. No reply. I set it face down on the table beside the ledger. Outside, the wind stirred the moss in the oaks, and the soft rustle sounded almost like pages turning themselves. 3 days passed without a word. The cake sat untouched in the refrigerator, each slice wrapped in foil like a small apology. I told myself Cassia was busy, that she'd call once things settled down. By Thursday afternoon, the truth arrived in the form of a single text. Need $2.850 for Colt's mother's 70th. You'll be our gold patron. Sending details. For a moment, I thought it was a mistake. Then the second message came through a glossy PDF flyer titled Celebrating Maureen Holt, 70 Years of Grace. My own photograph. Pulled from Facebook. Smiled stiffly beneath the words, Sponsor Eulalia Marin. The coffee mug in my hand trembled. I scrolled twice, searching for any hint of an apology, but there was only a payment link. I tried calling Cassia. Voicemail. I waited an hour, then tried again. Still nothing. Around 6, my phone chimed. Don't make this dramatic. Mom, it's just money. I read the sentence twice. The words blurred against the screen. Small and cold. Just money. It was the same phrase she'd used after the tuition check, the wedding deposit, the new car for the kids. I remembered her as a little girl counting coins in my palm, laughing because money sounds like rain. Somewhere along the way, that sound had turned to thunder. I set the phone on the counter and looked around my kitchen. The walls I'd painted myself, the thrifted china cabinet, the light catching dust in the air. Every inch of this house had been built from sacrifices too ordinary to notice skipped vacations, second-hand clothes, quiet choices that made Cassia's world bigger. Now she was trading my name for a sponsorship banner. I folded the phone shut and pressed my hand flat on the table to steady it. The ache in my chest wasn't about the money. It was the realization that somewhere between giving and being used, love had become a transaction neither of us could afford. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table with my phone resting on a folded napkin. As if distance could soften what I was about to do, the screen still showed Cassia's last message. It's just money. I opened the banking app, the cursor blinking in the amount field. My hand didn't shake this time. I typed 1.0 and, in the memo line, wrote a single word, congrats. When I pressed send, a tiny blue check mark appeared. I took a screenshot and saved it in a new folder on my desktop. I named the folder Boundaries. The next number I dialed wasn't Cassia's. It belonged to a locksmith whose magnet advertisement had been stuck to my refrigerator for years. Frank Ibarra, he answered, his voice carrying the calm of someone used to emergencies. Yes, ma'am, I can be there within the hour. Frank arrived in a navy jacket and work boots scuffed from use. He replaced the front lock first, then the back. The sound of the drill against the wood startled me. But when he handed over 2 new brass keys, my breath came easier. No one gets in without these now, he said, smiling faintly. After he left, I brewed tea and opened my laptop. The spreadsheet grid stared back, empty and waiting. I began filling it, line by line, every check, every temporary loan, every promise to repay. I added an interest column, not for accounting, but for truth. Seeing the numbers grow was like tracing my own erosion. Halfway through, I stopped typing and stared at my reflection in the dark window. The quiet pressed close, almost tender. A thought rose uninvited. What if she never forgives me? My voice answered itself, low and certain. Then I'll finally forgive myself. Outside, the wind brushed the porch rail. I closed the spreadsheet, slid the new keys into a bowl near the door, and turned off the lights. For the first time in years, I felt the house settle around me like something solid and truly mine. By Saturday morning, my phone was already vibrating on the counter. The family group chat, silent for months, had come alive like a hive kicked open. Cassia's message glared at the top. When parents forget what family means, everyone suffers. A flood of comments followed. cousins and distant aunts chiming in with sympathy they hadn't earned. Then Colt added his own line, "Imagine choosing money over your grandkids." The words hollowed me out in a way even silence hadn't. I stood by the window, watching a trolley pass down Oglethorpe Avenue, its bell cutting through the noise in my head. The chat kept scrolling tiny hearts, angry emojis, judgment disguised as concern. I didn't reply. I couldn't trust my hands to stay steady. A soft ping broke through the storm. It was a private message from Dr. June Torres, my old colleague from the library. We'd fallen out of touch after retirement, but she must have seen the post. "Boundaries look selfish to the selfish," she wrote. "You did what you needed to do." I stared at her message until the screen dimmed. Feeling the first thread of steadiness I'd had in days, I opened my laptop, found the event email Cassia had forwarded, and drafted my own to the venue manager. I attached screenshots of the sponsorship flyer, explaining that my name and image were used without permission. My finger hesitated above send for only a second before I pressed it. 2 hours later, a reply arrived. "We sincerely apologize. Ms. Marin, your information will be removed immediately from all materials." The breath I didn't know I'd been holding left me in one long exhale. I closed the laptop and looked around the room. The afternoon light caught the brass keys in the bowl by the door, glinting like a quiet promise. Outside, a sparrow landed on the railing, shook itself, and flew off again unbothered. Free. I poured the rest of my cold coffee down the sink and watched it swirl away. The air lighter somehow. The house no longer echoing with someone else's noise. The first bang came just before 10. It rattled the glass in the front door and sent my teacup trembling across the table. I froze, listening. A second blow followed. Sharper, angrier. Through the peephole, the porch light caught Cassia's hair, loose and wild. Colt's shoulders squared beside her, and Maureen's voice slicing through the night. "Open up, Eulalia. You can't keep what doesn't belong to you for a moment." I couldn't breathe. My mind scrambled through the locks Frank had changed, the deadbolt, the chain. They were shouting about the china set the one Tom and I bought at an estate sale 30 years ago. I hadn't realized Maureen had ever even seen it. Cassia's voice cracked through the door. "You took Grandma Holt's heirloom, and we're not leaving until you hand it over." I stepped back. Shaking. The china was mine. I had the receipt tucked neatly in a folder. But logic didn't seem to matter anymore. Colt's voice boomed, demanding, accusing. Then a neighbor's porch light flicked on. Another door opened down the block. When the red and blue lights appeared, the noise shifted to murmurs. Officer Darius Calder stepped out of the patrol car, tall, steady, a notepad in hand. "Evening. Folks," he said, voice even. "Let's keep this calm." Cassia pointed at the door. "She's hiding our family property." He turned to me. "May I come in, ma'am?" I nodded and opened the door just enough for him. The air inside felt heavy with years of swallowed words. At the kitchen table, I laid out the folder receipts, texts, screenshots, and the tiny $1 transaction still glowing on my phone. Calder studied everything quietly, then closed the folder and met my eyes. "This is a civil matter, not criminal," he said softly. "You're within your rights." Outside, I heard Cassia's voice waver, followed by the sound of retreating footsteps. When the street finally fell silent, I stood in the doorway, the porch light humming above me, and felt something inside settle. My hands were still shaking, but the house no longer felt defenseless. Morning came pale and clean, light spilling through the lace curtains in thin silver ribbons. The house smelled faintly of tea and furniture polish. the sense of ordinary peace. I sat at the kitchen table with my hands wrapped around a mug that had gone cold before I could finish it. For the first time in weeks, there was no buzzing phone, no echo of accusation, only quiet. A soft knock sounded at the back door. When I opened it, Mr. Ashford stood there, holding 2 paper cups and a brown paper bag that smelled of cinnamon. "Heard the ruckus last night," he said gently. "You handled that with more grace than most of us could have managed." He set 1 cup in my hand before I could protest. We talked a while, nothing heavy, just the kind of talk that lets the heart rest. He told me the magnolias on his porch were starting to bloom early this year, that he'd save me a clipping when they opened. By late afternoon, June Torres knocked softly on the same door, still in her scrubs from the hospital. She didn't ask questions, only poured herself tea and listened while I told her everything. When I finished, she smiled, weary but sure. "Boundaries rebuild peace, not walls," she said. "You've done something hard and holy." After she left, I stepped outside to get the mail. Mixed among bills and advertisements was a small envelope with no return address. Inside lay a $100 grocery card and a handwritten note for a woman who finally said no. I stood on the porch, the evening humidity curling my hair, the air thick with the perfume of magnolia buds ready to burst. My throat tightened as I slipped the card into my pocket. I didn't know who had sent it, and maybe that was the point. The city hummed softly around me, distant trolley bells, cicadas starting their song. For the first time in a long while, Savannah didn't feel like a cage. It felt like home again, steady and forgiving, the kind of place where even silence could be kind. The next morning, I cleared the dining table and spread out everything I'd collected: the ledgers, emails, and printouts that had once lived in quiet stacks around the house. Sunlight touched the paper edges, turning them gold. It struck me how many years of my life were recorded in these small rectangles of ink and numbers. I wasn't angry anymore, just tired of being rewritten by other people's stories. I opened a fresh document on my laptop and began typing, line by line. I itemized every temporary loan, each forgotten promise, every birthday they'd skipped or turned into an argument about money. The list stretched longer than I expected, but the rhythm of it was steadying. When I reached the end, I wrote the sentence that had been sitting inside me for years. This isn't about repayment. It's about respect. I formatted the letter neatly, dated it, printed 3 copies, and signed each in blue ink. Then I walked to the small post office off Bull Street and paid for certified delivery. 1 envelope for Cassia, 1 for Colt, 1 for Maureen. The clerk slid the receipts across the counter with a quiet nod, and I tucked them carefully into my purse. That evening, June stopped by after her shift, bringing soup in a thermos. We sat on the porch, listening to the hum of crickets as she scrolled her phone. "You'll appreciate this," she said, turning the screen toward me. It was a clip from Maureen's church last Sunday's sermon on forgiveness and humility. We both laughed, not cruelly, but with the shared weariness of women who've seen hypocrisy dressed as virtue. After June left, I printed 1 last copy of the letter and sealed it in an envelope addressed to myself. I placed it beside the bowl of brass keys on the table, a small record that I had. At last, spoken clearly, the clock ticked softly in the quiet house. Outside, the magnolias had begun to open, white and fragrant against the deep green leaves. I breathed in their sweetness, steady and clean, and felt the first flicker of pride instead of pain. A month slipped quietly through the Savannah heat, the kind that made the air shimmer above the cobblestones. Life had settled into a rhythm again. Coffee on the porch, the hum of cicadas, and the faint sweetness of magnolia drifting through the screens. I hadn't heard from Cassia since the letters, but silence, I was learning, could be its own kind of mercy. Then, one afternoon, I overheard a conversation at the bakery down the block. Two women, all perfume and pearls, whispering over scones. "Did you hear about Maureen Holt's 70th?" one said. "The hotel cut the lights during dessert. Cards declined. Entire bill unpaid." I stirred my tea and said nothing. The words washed over me like distant thunder. Later, when I checked social media, Cassia's post appeared near the top of my feed. "Family should lift you, not lecture you." Beneath it, the usual sympathy parade friends offering support. Hearts and praying hands. My fingers hovered over the comment box. A dozen replies formed in my mind, truths I could finally speak, but I closed the app instead. My peace didn't need to be proven in public. That weekend, I met Mr. Ashford at the farmer's market by the river. The stalls overflowed with late summer color tomatoes, peaches, bundles of herbs. He handed me a small bouquet of tulips. "Yellow as morning light. For your table," he said. "Every home needs fresh things now and then." I smiled and bought them, choosing brightness over bitterness. Back home, the voicemail light blinked on my phone. Cassia's voice, softer than I remembered, filled the room. "Hi, Mom. I miss you. I messed up. I'm sorry." The message ended before I could catch my breath. I sat at the table, the tulips leaning toward the window, and replayed the sound of her voice once more. There was no promise attached this time, no hidden ask, just a small fracture of truth left open, the kind you could either close or let heal on its own. It was a Sunday evening when Cassia appeared on my porch. The air was soft with the scent of rain and cut grass, and the sky over Savannah had turned the color of old pewter. She stood there in a linen dress, holding a pie tin in both hands like an offering. No rehearsed smile. No sunglasses to hide behind, just the quiet uncertainty of someone who'd run out of defenses. "Hi, Mom," she said. "I baked pecan. Thought you might like some." I opened the door and stepped aside. "Come in, sweetheart." Inside, she glanced around the room as if it had changed shape since her last visit. Maybe it had. The air felt lighter now, the silence friendlier. I led her to the kitchen, cut 2 slices, and poured tea. We talked about the ordinary things: weather, her boys' school projects, a new teacher she liked. Not once did money cross our lips. At one point, she reached across the table and brushed her fingers over mine. Almost shyly, "I've been thinking a lot about how I handled things," she said. "I didn't make it easy to love me." I smiled. Small and steady, you were always easy to love. Just hard to rescue. She didn't cry, and neither did I. The moment didn't need more than that. When she stood to leave, I walked her to the door. The new brass hook gleamed beside it, the label beneath clear and deliberate: home. 2 keys hung there, one engraved mine, the other guest. Cassia noticed them, but didn't ask. She only nodded, as if she understood what they meant. Outside, the streetlights flickered on, and the church bells from St. John's drifted faintly through the moss-hung air. I watched her car turn the corner, the tail lights soft as candle flame. Back inside, I locked the door and traced my fingers over the hook. "Love built us," I whispered to the empty room. "Boundaries kept us standing." The words settled into the quiet like prayer, warm and sure, carrying just enough grace to last the night.